So welcome to Clergy and Collars Getting Coffee. Today, my special guest is Reverend Jeff Sims. He is the pastor of Covington Presbyterian Church in Covington, Louisiana. Grew up in Alabama, Talladega, Alabama. You are Presbyterian now, but you have taken part in many of faith traditions.
Yes.
And we know each other because we're currently in the same doctorate of ministry cohort from at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. I forgot our school name for a second.
You almost
Um,
said I heard
I
that.
did, and I was like, I've never gone there. I mean, to visit. But yes, so welcome, Jeff. Nice to have you.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So so I get to do my favorite thing now, which is having conversations and getting to ask lots of questions while drinking coffee with friends. So this is very exciting for me. So
I
um
must say this has grown on me because when you first started doing this in our first class back in June of last year, I was so annoyed. I was like, why is she asking me questions? I'm here to study. Don't ask
yeah,
me questions.
I love questions. I always have. I said this has been a childhood dream. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be two people. Whitney Houston, which was ended probably quickly when I realized I would never have her voice. And then Barbara Walters was the other one. And I just, Barbara Walters, when I was growing up, she was just like, she interviewed everybody, right? It was always questions, questions, questions. And then, since her, there were others that I certainly appreciated. But I was like, talk show host, that's a sweet gig.
Mm.
It's a sweet, that was always my feeling. Like, well, how cool is it that you get to ask questions of people all the time and they answer you? But
Yeah, that's the good part. The flip side of that is you never get asked questions. But what I appreciated about your podcast is you led with, "Hey, I'm going to answer these questions too." So
yes, yes, the preview is I'll answer some of these questions too. Yeah, I've always enjoyed asking people questions. It for me is like just a great way. I like to get to know people in that manner, obviously. And
there's
anyways,
ringing in the background.
yeah, of course. Well, that's the life of a pastor is
We got
or anybody, I guess, interruptions, you never know. So sort of I guess where I wanted to start is, as we were just thinking about it, like you just got interrupted with the phone, but is there anything that you really wish? You've been in ministry for quite some time, chaplain for decades and everything. Is there anything that you're like, man, I wish I had known or had a class on this subject before I entered ministry, or just had a knowledge base or skill set in this field before I came into ministry?
Yeah, that list is long. How much time do we have?
Yeah. As
No,
long as you want, Jeff.
I think COVID obviously taught us all how inept, and maybe not all of us, but certainly my generation of ministers, how inept we were with technology and all things media. I mean, I had to learn on the fly. Thankful I had a friend and colleague in ministry who, when we were shut down, he and I merged and we did sort of a podcast like um, mini sermon discussion on the text for that week. And he was much more adept at some of those technology things than I was. And so he helped me tremendously. But that's got to be at the top of the list. It's got to be that. I wished I had somebody talk to me about um, earlier. Not that people haven't talked to me about that, but I wished I had somebody talk to me earlier about whiteness and maleness. uh, that's going to resurface throughout this conversation. But yeah, you know, you mentioned I grew up several things. Babdo-Methatarian, maybe is what you
Yeah.
call it. Something like
It's a mouthful is what it is. That's what it is.
that. But in the Baptist church, man, all the models were white and male. And
Mhm.
so I wished, I guess I did. Now that I reflect back on it, I worked with people who were in the Pentecostal faith, and I did see women of color in leadership roles in the Pentecostal church. But in my own church, I didn't see that. So I wish somebody had, kind of had that conversation with me earlier. But I don't know that that would have worked because, it was a different time in the 90s, 80s, and 90s.
Mhm.
So, not that there weren't female models, uh, but they were very few and far between. So, I wish somebody had that conversation with me. The technology piece, the list goes on and on. We were just having on Saturday. We were leading a group of commissioned lay pastors, and this came up. This very thing came up, and interestingly enough, um, they said they wished. And so let me preface it. There were two people in the class who had previously done some theological work. One was a Master of Arts in Christian Education, so not
Okay.
quite the MDiv, but similar. And another was doing an MDiv through the Episcopal Church and has
Okay.
decided to move over. So they had done some work, and they talked about the distinction between installed pastors and lay pastors
Hmm.
and power struggles. And I thought, I've never had to consider that because of this, right?
Yeah.
The whiteness, the maleness, it fits what people think they're after, right?
Mhm.
Most people, not all people, most people, most churches.
Right.
So, at any rate, those are three things that I mean, we could go on, but those
I
three.
I call it the default setting, but y'all don't like it when I compare white maleness to Times Roman's numerals font on a programmed computer.
I'm so much more than Times Roman. I'm
Well,
so,
you are, Jeff. You as an individual are. Yes. Your system, however, might be the default setting,
yeah,
right? But that's what it is, right? Our default setting is what we're familiar with or what our culture has decided we're all supposed to be familiar with. Um, and so how, like, a lot of the stuff that you just talked about and where you ended up does relate to that notion of the power struggle, right? That power when you it was a course we sort of it was part of a piece of a course we just finished, right? When do we lean in? When do we move out? Are people really voiceless or do we just fail to pass the mic? So I think all those things are really important in ministry and you're right. There's a difference between learning it as a abstract notion and learning how to practice it in a real concrete setting. Yeah.
I was with a colleague and I. We were in theology of art, film, and literature was a class we had in graduate
I
school,
would have loved that class. Yes.
and it was absolutely a wonderful class. And so we were going to experiment. We were the only two males in the class, and both white males, obviously. And we went and we dressed like women and came into the class, and we got catcalled.
Mhm.
He said, "See," and it just started all kinds of stuff. And then John and I went on to go down the street to School of Theology at Virginia Union, and we were upset the day that we were told by the mostly African American group of women that we could not be womanist. And for the life of us, we were mad. We left upset that we couldn't be womanist, and
Yes.
which proves the point that we didn't learn much about womanist theology. That
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You have since.
I
You
have
have
learned a
since
lot since.
learn more sense. But that's exactly what it is. Like when we force ourselves into spaces and all I think that's a fairly human thing, right? I don't think that uh cisgendered straight white males have the market on forcing themselves into a space. But certainly, um, it's not as common that you have to, right? You just kind of walk in and you're automatically given power, which is kind of what we're talking about. It's interesting. So what then, because I know you've developed these parts of your even if you didn't get it in seminary, right? Or you didn't get it prior to, you've definitely done work in these areas. So what could you say are maybe some of those books or movies or people even who kind of shape that? Are there any pivotal, you can sort of tether moments, I guess, that you could go to and say, these were some of those moments in my life? Because I have those too, right? Like,
Yeah. Good question. There obviously could be lots of books that obviously all are going to float right on out of my mind now that you've asked the question.
yeah,
Uh,
that's how it happens.
what what I'm struck by, what I'm drawn toward, is my initial encounter in CPE and learning what it meant to walk into a room
Mm.
with a suit and a bow tie and knock on the door and be permitted entry into the room, and then there'd be a person in the bed who had no power, who had been stripped of clothes and everything, and were in a backless gown laying in the bed. And then here's some dorky looking white guy with a bow tie on who's going to come in and say, "Hey, can I pray for you? How are you today? What can I do to help you?" And they were just like, "Can you leave?" So I think having those encounters and experiences where my patients were my teachers. By the way, I'll give this disclaimer, and if I don't know who I need to pay or who we need to pay to make this announcement, but whatever. Um, all pastors should do at least 2 units of CPE. It's just good. It's
You're preaching to the choir on this one. Yes.
good for the soul.
Yes.
Any rate,
It's priceless. That's a priceless gift, the CPE units. Yeah.
yeah, and so I think it's those people. They're mostly um, faceless people now. I mean, not that they don't have faces and they aren't important, but
Yeah. No, yeah.
I cannot remember, but I remember the challenge. I remember the question. I remember the man. You've got to turn in your bow tie for something else and get to a place where you can hear people where they
Yeah.
are. And so it leveled the playing field for me, I think, in a lot of ways. I learned a lot about power and authority in CPE. Um, Learned that my whiteness and maleness doesn't help me in a lot of ways. Right? That there are people who immediately shut down when I walk in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and by the same token, people open up to me when I walk into an opposite room or a different room. And so I think those are the people. There have certainly been people, persons in ministry who've influenced me, and I don't want to give the
Start
laundry.
naming them. Yeah. And leave somebody out. Right. I get it.
Somebody see this and say, "Oh, well, I wasn't important to Jeff." All of it has been important to me, and I think Carrie Dorian, "Care of Persons, Care of Worlds" is one of those sort of texts that I had in CPE that caused me to think outside the box and
Mhm.
get over who I am and think about people and their perspectives, and much like what we just finished in this last class that we had
Yeah.
up in just reading from another point of view. You know?
Yeah, right. Because that was one of the classes, and we read a lot from minoritized settings. So it can be one of the books we just read, but is there anything that you're currently? It doesn't have to be pushing you to. I guess it doesn't have to be one of those tether moments, but is there something you're reading or listening to or watching at the moment that you'd be like, everybody should be reading this, watching this, listening to this. This is so good. It's that good.
Um, you'd be surprised that I have a couple answers for that one. Uh,
No, I'm not.
so, so Yes, I came back home and there were several people that we had read for class that I was very interested in, and I got a couple in the mail already, and I can't wait to break them open. I'll show you two of those, and then I'll go to a T. I know you like TV shows, and
Yes,
the
I do.
TV show that I'm watching that's maybe I don't know, maybe says more about my whiteness and maleness. But anyway, we'll talk about it. So, um,
The
uh,
book.
Trouble the Water. Ooh,
Oh,
that's from a spiritual. And this is my friend Michael Ray Matthews, who's done a lot of community organizing. He's out in California. And this one is the subtitle is A Christian Resource for the Work of Racial Justice. And so
nice.
I serve on our racial reconciliation team in the Presbytery. And so we've been working through a lot of different things, trying to figure out how to help our church leadership and our presbytery uh,
Mhm.
be more direct and open with racism and systemic racism. And this has become a pretty important resource that I'm going to lean into. And it's not one to, yeah, Trouble the Water, Michael Ray Matthews, Cody Sanders, and Marie Claire Onwabatumi.
Yeah,
Um,
good luck. Yeah.
yeah, it's um, yeah, I butchered your name, Marie Claire. I am so sorry, but
Yeah.
that one's good. One of the other ones we read in Pittsburgh was Stephanie Crowder, and I have really loved her. Stephanie Buchanan Crowder. I have really loved her stuff. And this one's When Mama Speaks, and
Nice.
it's back to this womanist thing that the Bible and motherhood from a womanist perspective. And
Yeah.
so very interested in that. So those are two that I'm anxious. I just got them like 3 days ago, and I'm anxious to jump in. So, and then my friend recommended, my friend being you, some Dr. Seuss books, and I went home and found that one of the ones you recommended my son had, and I'd
Read
actually
with my eyes shut.
no, not that one. Oh God, what is it? It's yellow. It says not odd. Is it? Oh, just like
I don't.
anyway, you recommended two different ones to me.
Yeah.
It's not the Dr. Seuss, it's the other one. But
Oh, the beautiful oops.
beautiful oops, that's it, the beautiful oops. And
I was
so
like, I don't remember which Dr. Seuss book with the yellow cover. Yes, I do love a children's book for
yeah,
sure. I'm a huge fan of I have a small collection here, my larger collection at my at home of children's books. They're like some of my favorite ways of learning. Because
Amy,
yeah.
Amy Jill Levine has written a lot of children's book lately. We bought several of those for our church here.
Yeah, I think I have at least 3 of them over on my shelf. Yeah. I'm a fan. There are several children's book authors that I'm a huge um fan of, but sometimes it's just like, oftentimes I think, you were talking about race and racism, right? Is that people like push back against, oh, I don't have time to read Cast. I'm like, well, it's worth making time for, one, but two, if you don't have time for that, then here are some children's books, right? I don't have time to read Stamped from the Beginning or How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I'm like, well, did you know that he also wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist Baby? So you can get like a Cliff Note shorthand version, and that doesn't discount, like, read the other stuff. But if the excuse is I don't have time to, then I was like, you probably have time to read this book because it takes about 10 minutes on a slow day, right? To get through. And and I also think children's literature currently, right now, in its current thing, in far more diverse, many stories from different perspectives. And I certainly appreciate that, stories about refugee children, stories about, new children who are, stories of children of color, variety of backgrounds. I appreciate sometimes seeing something like written in Spanish and then either translated or not, right? Because it's okay if I'm sometimes the person lost in translation. I often person lost in translation, or I'm also then hard to follow. So what's the TV show?
Yeah, so the TV show is a Netflix series called The Recruit, and I know
Right.
it's It's a CIA, you know. I have that background where I served in the military when we were fighting for oil. Yeah, right. Our oil interests. I
Mhm.
since have grown a brain a little bit about some of that. Not no disrespect to those who've served, but yeah, it scratches my itch for that, and you know, it's rough. It's espionage. It's spies. It's you know, my other favorite class at college was cloaks, daggers, secrets, and spies. The history of espionage, and so that was my absolutely favorite class in history class at Sanford. And so I have always sort of had that itch for secrets and spies and cloaks and daggers.
And I mean, that's interesting. So then when you look at, because I mean, certainly some of that is in the biblical stories as well,
Oh yeah.
right? So what then are some of those that you would say these are some, I mean, some we might know about, some we might not, right? Not everything appears in electionary text, which is more, the Peace USA world of that versus some of the other denominations or traditions.
Mhm.
So what are then some of those favorite stories or characters that also then scratch that espionage spy itch?
Well, yeah, there are lots of those, but I think scratching that itch of competition, you know, scratching that itch of white maleness from Alabama and competition and fighting. I think I was always earlier in life drawn to Joshua. You
Mm,
know, we even sung
yeah.
songs about it. You remember
Yeah.
that one?
Yes. Yes, I do. You can sing it if you want to.
Joshua? You will, people will immediately turn the podcast. And the walls come tumbling down. And you
Right.
know, I used to think, man, that's my favorite story because people are getting to go into the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. And then later in life, I discovered, oh, God conquers. God was a conquering God. God pushed people out so that the Israelites could come in. And then we were just reminded that of this past week in class, or a
Yeah.
couple of weeks in class, when we read that piece about the Canaanites and the cowboys. And I was
Right.
like, God, here we go again.
I
And so,
know. My mind will never cease to not go, "What?" Like, there are so many, like, I'm like, I think I know a lot. Not that I personally like, but I have a lot. There's a lot of information up here, right? And yet still I'm floored by the amount of information that is brand new or a perspective or an angle, that you're like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." And then sometimes when you're like, "Oh, I've read that," right? That was the point. We read about the Canaanites over and over and over again. But hearing them compared to an indigenous people,
yes,
you're like, "Whoa, that changes
everything. Yeah.
everything." Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
With those people. Yeah. Yeah. No, so that one was one I think earlier in my early days. My mom and I used to sit in the formal living room and read our Bible every night, and we'd pray before we went to bed. And that was always one of the stories I kind of went back to. And Joshua, you know, Joshua's got that whole Yeshua, God is salvation, God saves thing. So that was an earlier one. But as I grew older, I think I really began to understand maybe a little more about Job, right? So going away from sort of um, the spy espionage thing, um, Job had a lot of loss in life and
Mhm.
lost our home in Katrina, and then my wife and I had lost a child at 38 weeks, stillborn. Eli was his name, and so in those losses, I thought I'm playing out the story of Job. People
Mm.
would come to me and say the most god awful theological concepts you can ever imagine. You know, things like, well, don't you know God needed your child more than you did? I said, fine, send him yours and give me mine back. What about that? You know,
Yeah.
so, you
Yeah,
know,
that's grief for you right there, right?
so I
Like
have a,
that's the grief of something we don't even have a word for, right? That's how deep that moan is.
all the way down. And
Mhm.
so I just, I have it's a visual. It's a file 13, and pastoral care be damned is written on the top of it. And I put that under pastoral care be damned. Don't ever say, for all you out there, don't ever say to somebody, God needed your child more than you did. That does not hunt. That is not good. That's, yeah, terrible. Anyway, so I recounted that how Job's friends had an answer for everything, right?
Everything.
And as we lived through some of those losses, I said, what if there just is no answer for the loss? And it is.
Mhm.
You know, how you negotiate that, and how do you just move forward, or maybe you don't. Sometimes people do get stuck. Um, but yeah, so I think later, as I've grown older, I've come to identify more with Job. I can appreciate, of course, he had a lot to lose. That
Yes.
Job was, he had privilege, and so I get that. And I think, he's humbled by God. Where were you when I put the world in motion? So
Mhm.
I think,
That's some great prose right there. That those chapters of being like, where were you when da 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 da? Where were you when the and it is hard, like, but switching that mindset. I mean, when you talked about Katrina and your life being affected and you losing everything in that process. I mean, I suppose there's a way that there are people who believe, right? Those things happen because we deserved it. We're being punished for something. Um, and there might have been times in your life that you believe that. And then, maybe, and then getting to a point where you're like, sometimes things just are. They've happened. And, you know, we'll respond this way to it. But there's no way to make this thing that happened into, sometimes the lesson comes a lot later, right? Or the value of what you learned. You're like, I could have gone without that. I mean, it did teach me, it helped to reinforce or help me to think about these sort of things, but maybe there was another way I could have learned that lesson where I didn't have to suffer such loss.
yes, yes, yes. But it, you're right. There is another way, or you hope there's another way. And do you really learn it? I think. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting you can't learn things without having gone through them, but
Right.
in a different way. It supersedes what just happens up here between the ears. It's an embodiment about
Yes.
the hurt and the pain and the loss that you learn in a new way. You know,
Yeah.
God-
So you're also talking about some pretty, I mean, you've mentioned some pretty big theological uh arguments or cruxes or whatever. I often think about this in terms of Jacob wrestling with God, right? Holding on until he gets a blessing, but also leaving with a permanent limp, which I feel Jacob in that moment, right? But do you have any current, or have you had any what I'll call big theological wrestling matches, or maybe you feel like you're in one right now, and it might be for the broader church, it might just be for you personally, that you read a particular passage or something and you're like, I don't really like what that says.
for me, a lot of people struggle with theodicy.
Mm.
Um, I don't know that that's mine. I get it. Um, I'll give you, for example, when just like Job, people wanted me to be mad at God when we
Mm.
lost, and it just didn't connect here or here, because when I'm hurt, when I'm down, when I'm really struggling, God is the first place I go, not the last place. And so why am I going to be mad at my source, right?
Mm.
And I get what they were trying to communicate. I think they were trying to be helpful, and
Oh,
yeah,
so are Job's friends, right?
yeah, they were trying to help, be helpful. But so I've sort of moved. I'm not arrived. I don't want to communicate that I've arrived or that I have everything figured out. But that's not the biggest struggle for me in terms of theodicy. It is a struggle with everybody. in terms of theology. But I think for me, what's been surfacing recently, and it's not new, it's a replication. I've been in spiritual direction several times throughout my life, and therapy too, as a matter of fact. And one of the things that often would surface was trust. You know, are you really going to trust God, or do you have to hold something back and take it into your own hands? And you let it go? And I think in my faith development and discernment, one of the things I'm struggling with, and I think I may have mentioned this to you, class, in Pittsburgh, is I think there's a role resistance has
Mm.
our way of learning, and particularly our way of spiritual learning. And you know, I came home and I was interested. I Google searched it, Google Scholar. If you ever want to go down into the rabbit hole, just do a search on Google Scholar.
All right.
And and so everything I found, people were trying to fix it, counteract resistance, or fix resistance.
Right.
What I keep wrestling with, what I keep chewing on, is what if resistance is necessary? And I mean, we see this. I was listening to your first edition of your podcast in
Yeah,
order
a little preview. Yes.
to get prepped, and I was struck by, you know, you like Jonah, and so Jonah is this guy who just resists. He
Oh,
won't. You need to go over here. No, hell, I'm going to Joppa. Forget about you.
it's like,
And
no.
I'm going the other way. What is it about that resistance that,
Mm.
you know, opens him up? What is it about that resistance? What is it about being swallowed by a whale that makes you say, okay, maybe I'll listen?
Maybe, right?
so so there is this, for me, there's this role that resistance plays in sort of our spiritual learning. And I think what I'm coming to appreciate is, if you've got some resistance going on, you better slow down and pay attention, because there's a good chance that something's happening right there. You
Well,
know,
I was just thinking about what happened when we were in seminary. I mean, when we were at school, I went into the creative arts space, right? For instance, as a resistance. And there's sometimes where resistance is exactly what we need in order to stabilize, right? We did talk about this a bit in class. Like, you know, if you're up on a high ropes course or something and you're unsteady, then if you push it out, right, and make that tension, that resistance take place, you're actually become stabilized there in the middle, right? So, you know, we push against the wall. But there is, you know, what I discovered in the creative space is I did that with the button maker. And I did not, right? I did not listen to the resistance of the machine, and I pushed through
yeah,
and broke it. Just
yeah,
straight up broke it. And so I do think I hear that there is like this balance in listening to those places that we resist. Like when we encounter somebody that we're like, you know, like I can be really thankful that you resisted your urge to run away from my questions and you went, oh, okay. Okay, they annoy me. Why do they annoy me? What is it about it? You know, whatever. But you sat with that resistance, right? And it pushed through to something else, which doesn't mean my questions don't ever annoy you. It
oh,
just, you've gotten to a spot with them where you're like, you know, it is. But,
and
but sorry, I missed that, Jeff. I think you zoned out.
it's helpful. It's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, but I think it's good to go, you know, sometimes the question, it might be better questions to ask, like, why am I resisting a relationship with that person? Why do I resist going into that, you know, part of town or that field or that place or that, you know, I think, you know, it's good for us to know, because I think we have gut reactions to stuff for a reason. And some of it is learned and some of it is protective. It's epigenetics, right? It's very old. But you know, I think it's good to pay attention to those places. I do think there's a great deal of learning in what it is that we naturally want to rebel against. And some of us are born rebels, like Jonah. That man, he, you know, I appreciate that. There are some of us who just like to rebel against about everything, and sometimes not always with grounding it or purpose. But you are somebody who, I mean, you just even mentioned here some ways in this conversation about ways that you resist the urge to find a solution, right? So some of that is chaplaincy as well. You resist the urge to just solve a problem, to sew everything up and make it nice, neat, and a happy ending. And um and so I wonder, do you have practices or rituals or things that you do that help you live in that more fluid and or I would even say chaotic space, right? Like I often say God does her best creating out of chaos or their best creating out of chaos. That's how the whole world came to be. That's my impression of that. So I don't view chaos as necessarily a horrible thing, though there are moments when it's absolutely is that.
Right, right. Well, and I think you got to be comfortable in ambiguity, and I don't think a lot of people in our churches and our friends and families are comfortable in ambiguity.
Mm,
Um, I haven't always been comfortable in ambiguity. I think that is something I've learned as I've grown older. Um, I think one of the ways so the way we start class with BJ up in Pittsburgh every morning before we dive into the academia is one of the ways that keeps me centered and keeps me saying, "Hey, what's going on here? What am I paying attention to?"
mm,
But the struggle is, I often make that a head exercise, right? I don't often listen to what's going on with my body, and so what I've appreciated recently is I'm trying to listen more to my body and what my body is telling me. And sometimes we can be really divorced from our bodies, just
mm,
attached. And so I'm trying to pay more attention to that. But resistance often, for me, can be felt in my body before it can ever register here. I mean, that's neuroscience, right? It's
yes,
not our brain telling us our bodies, it's our bodies saying to our brain, whoa, something's going on here. You pay attention.
it's
Uh,
interesting.
and so you feel a pit in your stomach, or something happens and you tweak your back, or you sleep the wrong way and you've got this knot in your neck, and oh, wonder what's happening. What's going on here? Um, so yeah, I think being intentional is one of those ways. Not being afraid of it and running from it, but rather just kind of sitting with it. We had this just this past week. We were in a redevelopment team meeting for our sister church, who's nesting with us. It's a Lutheran church, and they're trying to discern what the next steps are for them as a congregation, their identity. And so all of these things that are coming up are business practices, right?
Mm,
It's not doing this, or we're not taking this approach, or here's a problem. We know it's a problem. How do we solve it? How do we fix it? And so immediately we go to fixing, and I'm like, wonder what's going on in this resistance. And so we don't need to fix it. We sit with it and think about it? Well, come to find out, it's grief work.
mm,
They lost their building that was such an identity marker for them.
mhm,
They're worried about the loss of people who are helping them with their main mission, which is feeding hot meals. And some key people have pulled out, and so as a result, they're highly anxious, and in that anxiety, they switch to what's comfortable, right? Let me just go to the business, and let's find a way to fix it, and we'll just fix it, and then we'll move on. And I don't think that's what holy work is. I don't think that's what God work is. I don't think that's how the Spirit moves. And so, yeah, just try to sit with it. Try to be more present with it. And I specifically encourage people to say, because I haven't always done this, what is your body saying to
mhm.
you? And by me encouraging them that, it makes me think about, okay, what is yours saying to you? And, yeah, it
Yeah.
reinforces.
Staying in the muck is real hard.
Yeah, we don't like it. We don't like the muck, and I get it. I get
No,
you.
I mean, in real life, in like not in the muck of emotions and feelings, but in real life, I really, really don't like being dirty. I hate it. I hate being dirty. And I always have. But I have learned how to dress appropriately, right? If I know I'm gonna get into some dirt, right? So that you don't just go, "Eh!" Like, I didn't wanna get this shirt all dirty. Um, but I was not a play like, beyond age 3, I never played in the mud. Like, I remember very distinctly, rain came down at camp, the field is all muddy, and everybody was so excited to go play football in the mud, and I was like, "See y'all later." Like,
Gotta go.
I was like, "I'm gonna go sit over here and stay out of the mud." But, you've learned, right? That's a learning thing, and sometimes I think that is like even with the body, like and I always think this is interesting, right? Learning how to listen to our bodies more or to be able to advocate for them and things that we think we need, whether that's something from a mental health professional or our spiritual perspectives or all those things or our actual primary care doctors, um spending time in the body, whether it's through a prayer practice or meditation or oftentimes um with me too, I also it's just exercising every day because you realize like, oh, my body changes every day. Like that's something like I know when I've sat too long in a day that I am going to need to spend time not sitting and stretching later on in because my body's going to tell me that, but I only know it because I know those are the signs of exhaustion. Whereas if you never pay attention, you just go, well, that's just the way it is. I've just gotten older. I've just gotten this is my back's always hurt, whatever, not realizing that maybe some of the work that we can do in other areas could help alleviate, not eliminate, but alleviate.
Oh, right. I wished I exercised more. I really do. That's part of my growing edge about paying attention to my body. Right. As I get
Yeah.
older, I have hurts and tweaks that I didn't used to have, and that means something. And often it just means I don't like to exercise.
So, it's really interesting. I'll say for me, like where it starts, and I realize that I start a lot of things this way, is I just go, I'm just going to dedicate this much time to this activity, and I'll do as much as I can during that time. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going. I was trying to learn how to run because I never was a runner, never run. And so I was like, I want to learn how to be a runner. Well, the thing is I had several people who were like, well, if you've never run before, there's so many things to learn. I don't want to teach you, right? So you're gonna like, so I was like, well, then I'll learn on my own, right? My form is terrible. I have no idea, right? Form is terrible. I learned how to get good shoes, whatever. It all was a part of a process. Stumbled and bumbled my way there. But it just started with just going, okay, I would like to exercise for 30 minutes every day. I want to learn how to run. I would love to be able to run for 30 minutes. I don't know how to do that. So I'll just go out and run for as long as I can in that 30 minutes. And no judgment. Like that was the thing is sometimes I mean all of us are different. For me sometimes I have to let go of I have to lower the expectation, right? At the initial start. It's like, "Oh, I would love to learn how to do push-ups and sit-ups." Well, if I start by doing 100 and I've never done them, I'm going to fail, Jeff. Going to fail. Versus going, okay, I'm going to do it for 30 seconds and I'm going to do as many as I can in this 30-second spread. And I'm going to do 3 30-second intervals. And that's it. And over time, if you are consistent, right, it will happen. But that's not just with exercise. That's kind of how I approach
Yeah.
a lot of things. And then there are some things I absolutely hate that I would love to pay somebody else to do, like cleaning. Um, but I'm too cheap, right? So
Right.
you just
Right.
suck it up and do it yourself, right? And it's not going to be as good.
I can never justify paying somebody to clean my house. I just it goes against every grain of being. Well, so my mother, uh, who is still alive and who I still talk to once a week and I love dearly, um, and she knows I say this about her, is probably not diagnosed OCD, but she might be close. My father is a bit of a perfectionist. He works with his hands. He's always been a skilled carpenter, and he creates beautiful work. And so I've always been jealous, of the beautiful work he creates, and with his hands. And so yeah, I struggle because I'm the child of both of those folk. And you mentioned expectations. When you're in it, you got to let go of the high.
Mhm.
And I start up here, not down here. I start up here, and so yeah, it's a holdover. It's some of that background. It's that judginess. It's that
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. Um, I mean, all of us have different levels of what that is. Um, and just everything is sort of, I guess I developed it slowly by slowly, I'll get there, right? Slowly by slowly, whatever the goal is, I will get there. If that's what the ultimate expectation marker is, or the goal is, or whatever. Um, and that's helped me to learn how to be more forgiving of myself, right? In the process of becoming, which then in turn has helped me to be more forgiving of other people's mistakes and errors, right? Because I've learned how to forgive my own a bit better. So it unbelievably has been quite some time that we spent quite a lot of time together. Right, exactly. Oh wow. Who knew? So I'm gonna ask you my current favorite question to ask people, and which, is, if you were a Care Bear, right? What color would you be, and what is the symbol on your belly? And I know you love this question, and because so we read James K. Smith together as part of this course. You are what you love, and that to me was like he affirmed the Care Bear theology, right? That was an affirmation of the Care Bear theology, which may or may not have already been created by somebody else. I've never read it, and I'm creating it for myself, I guess. But I do believe theologically, right? We have spiritual gifts and graces. And so if those things that are Jeff, core value Jeff, were able to be printed in a symbol on your belly, what would it be? And then just what color Care Bear would you be? What's the love that you're loving out into the world?
Yeah, yeah. See, now people will understand why I don't always like your questions, because they're like, "Oh, I gotta look at me. I gotta be introspective." Um, yeah,
I
crimson.
will say, like, I have a brother who responded. I can't even say what he said his Care Bear would be, but it was in response to my annoying question more than it was to.
No, I actually love the question, and I am not one of those folk. I mean, I grew up, gosh, in the '70s and '80s, so I understand Care Bears. I actually uh, love the Care Bears. I like the Care Bears, along with Strawberry Shortcake and some others, which is not
Yep.
very male for you to love Strawberry Shortcake when you're anyway.
Yeah,
I,
but she's great. I
I would
agree.
I would be a a crimson Care Bear, partly because crimson is my favorite color. It's not a red. It's not a fire engine red. But it's not a purple. It's a wine. It's a merlot. It's a deep crimson kind of color, and I, I I think that's the word for me. It's deep. If you
Mm,
spill something that color on something white, it stains it.
yeah.
And it's deep. And along with that, I think the emblem or the symbol on my belly is going to be an anchor. I'll say what I mean about that. Anchor holds when there's storms and other craziness going around. And one of the things I learned in these are supposed to be off and silenced. One of the things I learned in my CPE time was that you have to, well, you don't have to, that's part of the learning, but how do I present as a non-anxious presence in the midst
Mhm.
of chaos? You brought up chaos earlier. Um, and I do think people are generally uncomfortable in chaos. And so I think, yeah, how can I be that calming presence, that anchoring presence in the midst of craziness happening all around us? And I think that's been a part of my life's journey. Um, there have been days when I've been better at it than others, but that's sort of a goal is to be sort of that, this may seem bad to you, but it's probably not the end of the world. Let's sit down, remember that we're in a relationship. This is not going to be the thing that ends it today. Let's talk about it. Let's yeah. So I'd be a Crimson Care Bear with a big anchor on my
Nice.
cover. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I can get behind that. That's great. But I do find it interesting to think like I do like what you learn about somebody when they think about part of their core personality and what's been with them the whole time and what um gifts we have, right? Because like many of the tools, if you don't use it, right, an anchor could just keep one, it can just be, it can be grounding, it could be all those beautiful attributes you listed, and at the same time not used, it literally is dead weight. Right, like that's,
Yes.
you know
Absolutely.
and I think there's um I always am curious as to how we then use these, because I think our skills, right, those things that are innately us, um a word my mom used to describe me, for instance, my whole life, and left me with when she died, was tenacious, right? So that is one of those like core words my mother has used my entire life to describe me. Now, as a kid, it resulted in my nickname, which was Tizzy, right? So, so as a child, the tenacity was a tantrum, literal tantrum. But just like anything, right? Those symbols or whatever, I think those are skills, if we learn how to use them, can be our biggest assets as well, right? So there are times when my tenacity still results like a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum. It does have moments where I have to resist the urge to hold my breath until I get my way. But there are other times, right, where what it's done is it's helped to see projects go through, helped to accomplish goals, not only for myself, but for other people, right? By just tenaciously cheering them on as they go to do something that they want to do. And so I think I think it's good to think about those skills and attributes. That is probably why I like the Care Bears. It's why somebody like Grumpy Bear becomes really important, right? Because grumpiness isn't exactly what we think of as like something we strive towards, whereas Tenderheart does, right? Tenderheart sounds lovely. um
Appreciate what you say because that's, yeah, it is. It's the flip side of the coin. My strength is often my limitation and vice versa. Yeah.
yeah, and chaos, or as we talked about, is one of those prime times, right? In crisis is where it comes out. Most of the times I'm cooperative and collaborative, but in crisis, I am directive and authoritarian, right? And I know this about myself, which is great if it's like a real emergency where you need to have someone to go, hey, you in the blue shirt, call 911. Hey, you do that, right? That's great. It is less great when it closes me down to hearing any other idea because I'm so tired of all the noise of the chaos, right? That I'm just like, nope, we're just doing this and shut it down. That's not really helpful.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating. And I thank you for spending this time having this conversation.
This was fun. I was a little anxious. I didn't know if I'd enjoy it as much as, not that I don't enjoy being with you, but
I
it's
understand. Yeah.
always this, this, this world of people watching us, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's a limited world at this time, but you never know, right? Like you never know how and where things are going to catch a hold and what people are going to hear. It's always fascinating to me what, as intentional as I may be with my words, and I'm not always intentional, but my best self, when I'm most intentional with my words, I still don't always know, or I hopefully I can be open to the hearing back, reflected back to me how the words landed. And I hope I am, because sometimes I can go, oh, I should work on that. And sometimes you go, yeah, that's your stuff.
That's right. Know what's yours and know what's everybody else's. I get
Right.
it.
But like, as we said, as you were mentioning earlier, you can't know that if you're not paying attention. If you're not doing some sort of examine, you cannot know that.
I find that a lot of people have no interest in that. They just don't. You know, I don't. How do I say this and not be disparaging? I don't mean that ignorance is bliss, right? We've heard that all of our lives. And
Mhm.
um, yeah, sometimes it's simpler just to not worry and not think about it. But that's not who I am, right? And so I get it. I'm envious sometimes of people who just don't. They don't want to.
This is a whole other podcast, because I see that as the tension between individualism and communal,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Like privilege and thing allow you to remain an individual, and you can all honestly convince yourself that you're not connected to
Mhm.
something larger
Yes.
than yourself. And so that framework is different. But that's a whole other
It is
hour-long conversation, Jeff.
something else. That is another podcast. I agree.
That's another conversation. But thank you again, and
Oh,
I look forward to class in June.
be here before you know it. Get that
It
reading list together.
will. All right. Thank you.